Hi, my name is Melissa Burkhardt, and I'm a board certified behavior analyst. And I'm so excited today to have the opportunity to be sharing with you best practices for supporting learners with challenging behaviors related to anxiety. You know who those learners are. I bet you're thinking of some children right now. A little bit about me, my background. I taught in public school for 20 years, ESE. I had an inclusion classroom and also a self-contained classroom. And then I had more and more children coming through my classroom with autism that were undiagnosed, especially in my pre-K classroom inclusive setting that I worked in. And I wanted to spend more time working directly with these children and their families. So I became a board certified behavior analyst and have been for the last almost 10 years. And I started my company Early Start 11 years ago and have been working directly with teachers and parents and directly with children providing services. Just a side note, my company was known for the last 10 years as Early Start and Autism, and we recently have changed to Early Start and Thrive to embrace the fact that we're working with children older than just early intervention and want to focus on helping all children to thrive. I want to thank you for doing what you do, which is being a teacher or being a support in a classroom. And being a teacher is by far the most challenging thing I've ever done in my whole life. You're always have to be present and on. There's so many things thrown at you throughout the day. And now we're adding additional challenges of having to have testing scores being at certain levels. There's so many demands on teachers. You have to give up of your personal life. Sometimes we end up financially putting into our classrooms. And as I said, now is a harder time, I believe, to be a teacher than ever before. So you make such a difference. You get to be with the children more than they actually get to be with their own parents, waking hours when you really do the math. So you have, I think, one of the most important jobs in the world. And I want to thank you for doing what you're doing. And I'm so grateful that I can support you in some way and support teachers because that was my passion. I love teaching and I love what I do now, but I really want to acknowledge you and how special you guys are and what a hard job you have. And it's my hope that today's webinar will give you strategies to help prepare your classroom as you're setting it up going into the new year. Some things you can be working on as you prepare yourself to go back into the classroom again, and some strategies and understanding and kind of a paradigm shift in understanding behaviors. I have always been fascinated by brain research, and lately, the last couple of years, even more of a focus on neuroscience and how that affects how a child's neural makeup affects their ability to attend and make good choices versus choices that we might see as bad behavior. And the strategies I'm going to share with you today are things that I've put in to place myself, put in place company-wide, and we've seen a positive impact across the whole company, also coaching parents and other teachers on these strategies and this kind of new lens at looking at children's behaviors. I hope that you can approach this with an open mind and an open heart, and that you will gain some valuable strategies that will make your teaching year better and make it a better teaching learning year for the children that you work with. So this teacher is stressed out. I'm sure you felt that way, thinking, how can I make it through this school day? How will I even make it through the year? Frequently, we have in our mind that we want children to comply and follow our directions, and that would be the ideal situation. If everyone would just comply and do what I ask them to do and not do all those other behaviors that get in the way of learning, then life would be good. And that's kind of how some of us go into looking at behaviors. It might be the way you were taught growing up that you're expected to comply versus having parents who might spend the time to talk you through some things. So I kind of want to help you make that shift today if you're kind of more on the compliance side to shift to the cooperation side, which is actually viewing children through a different lens in their behavior and gaining their cooperation versus kind of trying to get their compliance. And this takes a developmental look at children and also really takes into consideration their neurodevelopment, all the things that have happened to them to bring them to this point, which all influence the child's behavior. If you would please take a moment and think about a teacher in your life who touched your heart and touched your life in a profound way. A teacher that teacher probably made you feel safe, seen, cared about, valued. So just take a moment and just notice how your body feels, your heart, your breathing. I was thinking about my kindergarten teacher who was so kind to me. I have an August birthday, so I was young, and on top of that, I was developmentally young. I had some challenges, I had some hearing issues as a child that kind of affected my early development. And I went into kindergarten just a shy, overwhelmed, young child who some teacher could have viewed as, wow, what a pain, because I did cry a lot. I was very stressed to this teacher who just got on my level and saw me as the child with potential that I was. And that teacher made an impact on my life. Now, I want you to also, when I think about her, my heart feels happy and I just feel relaxed and safe. And then I want you to think about a teacher who maybe didn't understand you or was very compliance based, might have used a lot of punishment or even just speaking to you disrespectfully, and think about how you felt. And if you don't have a teacher that made you feel that way, maybe you had an adult in your life. I noticed my breathing got more shallow. I felt more stressed. Not only do being around people who make us feel safe have an effect on how we feel, it also has an effect on our physiological state. When we when our neurobiology, and let's just call it our safety detection system, feels safe, we're able to access more of our brain and we're able to learn more. We're always scanning the environment for things. Our neuro system is always scanning the environment for things to look out for, to keep our body safe. It's its job. It's always running in the background. When we don't feel safe, it shifts into different levels to protect ourselves, which also shifts our ability to attend to different things in the environment. If a child's feeling stressed for whatever reason, you may not understand why they perceive something as a threat. They're not able to access their language as well or able to learn as much because their whole fight or flight system, their whole system is going to be focused on scanning the environment and keeping themselves safe. Early in my career, my first 5 years teaching, I taught in an inner city school. And boy, those children were wired very differently than the schools I taught at later. I noticed that even if they accidentally bumped into one another, their first reaction was wanting to fight that person. Then I went and worked in more of a suburban area. And I really saw the contrast between children who had been raised in environments that had more scarcity and less safety, and versus children who were raised with an abundance of care and all the things they need. And their neurological system gets wired differently. The children at the inner city school went into fight or flight very easily. They misconstrued what other people said, put their whole safety detection system into protection mode. They could had a hard time paying attention because they were paying attention to protecting themselves, scanning the environment. They had a hard time just attending. The children from the background where they came from really more safe homes and had things that they needed were able to sit and attend a circle time. I was like, wait a second, those first 5 years I saw, they had the hardest time. And now look at these children. That's really what kind of kicked off this obsession with like learning about neuroscience and how our backgrounds and just our own basic individual biology affects our ability to learn. So, learning about neuroscience and then applying it to learning, classroom, behavior, all of this gives you this really advanced view of learning and behavior and will lend itself to learning about strategies that will help you be a better teacher, a better parent, a better wife, a better husband, and also will help the children in your classroom be able to learn and retain better and have better social skills. So, learning more about neuroscience actually sets us up for success, especially when we can break it down into bites of helpful information that can be applicable and can be applied. Children with anxiety are much more likely to be easily triggered into the fight or flight mode. Their safety detection system is high alert. Children with autism are much more likely to have anxiety. There's a lot of comorbid conditions that go with autism, along with ADHD, and also anxiety, as well as others. It's important to be aware of that. Children with autism overall have a higher rate of anxiety compared to the rest of the population. And there's reasons for this when you really think about how they process information. They have more attention to detail. The majority of children with autism do. So they might be stuck on a detail about a picture in a book, their pencil topper, and it makes it harder for them to shift their attention away from detail. They have a hard time sharing attention onto things, which can make transitions more difficult and make toleration to change more difficult. They also have, the majority have sensory sensitivities. So what you and I might see as something that is just every day doesn't bother us might really bother that child because when their sensory system may not be mature enough or developed differently, they might be taking in a certain sound or the way something feels, and it might trigger their whole sensory system to take that in as something to protect themselves from, as something that makes them feel unsafe and can trigger anxiety. I always think, when I see a child that's overreacting to something and my first reaction is, that's not a big deal. I remind myself of something that scares me to death and puts me into fight or flight. And you might laugh, but it's a roach. A roach will put me over the top where other people don't really care about it. But my whole system reacts. I am scared to death. Uh, It's so I kind of remind myself, and maybe you can do that. Remind yourself of something that really triggers you when you're working with a child who you're like, why are you so upset about this? Stop being silly. That's overreaction. Their system's set up differently, their whole sensory system. Social anxiety, children with autism have social anxiety. There's actually even a link between high intelligence, like level one children, and acute awareness of social difficulties. Like the more higher intelligence they have, the more they're usually aware, like, wow, I am not fitting in here. And even if they are not that aware, even despite where they are able to process things, they still have a hard time fitting in and they know that they're different or being laughed at. Children with autism have difficulty using and understanding language from idioms to sarcasm. They miss out on a lot of inferences, so they miss out on a lot of information. and we need information to help us be successful. They also have a harder time with functioning, executive functioning and abstract thinking. So you think about children that might not understand some abstract things, even with handling harder academic tasks, can make them feel anxious. They also might have difficulty with contextual cues. The majority of them do. Might totally miss out that they're talking about something and their communication partner is staring off and is like ready to be done. They might totally miss that because they're missing out on a lot of the cues in the environment that other people pick up on that lets them know, hey, it's time for a transition or something's about to happen. There's some children with autism don't really show signs of anxiety, but there's some children who do have a higher sensitivity and are more easily put into a state of anxiety. Also, children go through different things in their lives that might make them more sensitive and more anxious, depending on what's going on at home. Uh, the idea of a body budget. This has been talked a lot about by Dr. Mona Delahook, as well as some other people that she has studied with. And you think about a body budget, it really makes sense. Like everyone has a certain amount of body budget that you start off your day with, and you might not have slept well, takes out of your body budget. Didn't eat your breakfast, takes out of your body budget. Someone was mean to you on the bus, takes out your body budget. Us, we spill our coffee. We might be late. That's all taking out of our body budget. So then our sensory system and our whole neurobiological system becomes much more sensitive, and any little thing might set it off because you've used up a lot of your body budget. You don't have that much left. So as children come in our classroom at the beginning of the day, we don't know what their body budget is. So we want to help them keep a good body budget account, and also realizing that they might react differently daily. So some children who don't have much of a body budget and have a lot of anxiety are frequently in fight, flight, or freeze. And this is your body's natural state that it goes into to protect us from threats that you may not see as threatening, but their body takes it in as threatening. Or they might be recovering from fight, flight, or freeze, which means they might be overly tired, unable to attend, or they're assessing the environment for threats. Like I talked about earlier about those learners that I worked with who were always assessing the environment for threats. When we think about a child's their body budget and their ability to learn their best, a good way to put this is the green zone, and this comes from the zones of regulation, which some of you might be familiar with. I find is extremely helpful, taking something that takes something really abstract and makes it really concrete to talk to children about it and adults. It's the first step I use in parent coaching is helping the parents learn about the zones so they can be aware of themselves. So when a child's in the green zone, they have a good body budget. They're able to learn, access their executive functioning skills of initiating tasks, working memory, impulse control. Then, if something's happened that kind of feel like a threat, or they might just get overly excited, it can be kind of yellow zone can be scared or going over the top with overexcited. You might see an increase in repetitive and sensory seeking behaviors. An increase in moving about, running, knocking into people. You might see an increase in task refusal and an increase in protesting. As you start to notice these signs, if you notice this learner has like big wide eyes, mouth open, that's when you can start recognizing this child needs some help. If they continue this way, they're probably going to make it to the red zone, or they might get hurt, or they might hurt someone else. How can I help this child regulate and come back to the green zone so they'll be in the best state of learning? Sometimes children progress through the yellow zone or might go straight from the green zone to the red zone, or they might kind of be going back and forth between. You can go in between. So the red zone, you notice this little girl's face is scrunched up, She looks angry. Um, this child is in a high level of stress. She's in survival state. Her body is trying to keep her protected. And you think about fight, freeze, or fawn. Usually when fight, usually arms come out. It might look at swiping at people. It might look at pushing, raising the voice, stomping feet. This is not intentional behavior on the child's part. This is the child in a state of stress. And although the child might, that during this time, they sometimes engage in behaviors that are really a problem behavior, such as hurting other people or hurting themselves. However, at this point, there's neurobiology has taken over and they're in a survival state. At this point, the child cannot process language well. They might engage in unintentional behaviors. You'll see an increase in repetitive behaviors and sensory seeking behaviors. And they might push, lash out, and they might need to move. You think about flight as like a child lapping the classroom, running. The blue zone doesn't necessarily come after the red zone or before the green zone. Sometimes children get so stressed, fight or flight state, that they actually shut down. And so this is the freeze. And it's kind of sometimes hard to identify a child in freeze zone because you're like, hey, they're not bothering anybody. What's the problem? But you'll notice they look tired, sad. And if it's ongoing and happens again and again, uh, that's a red flag because it can lead to depression and suicide and um, other mental health issues. So be aware of that, please. This is a really great quote. Children are not giving us a hard time, they're having a hard time. You know, if you notice this little guy, teeth clenched, fist clenched, crumpled up his paper, you know, perhaps his body budget is low. Maybe he didn't eat his breakfast this morning. Maybe his mom yelled at him. Maybe his aunt died. Something bad happened in his life and his parents are stressed. Maybe he feels inadequate because the work is hard and he doesn't feel like he's good enough. He is stressed. If you approach this child and say, stop, why are you doing this? Get your work done. That will put the child more into a state of stress, which might mean running, eloping, hitting, acting out. This child is acting from body to brain. The child's bodies and feeling is dictating what the brain is doing. Sometimes children are calm, well regulated, and just testing the boundaries. We can call that a brain body behavior. That's when they need immediately clear consequences, and we'll be talking about natural consequences. They need to be taught versus this child who's in fight or flight needs help calming their body, regulating so that they can get themselves together so that you can problem solve afterwards. It's not a time to talk to the child, lecture, anything else. This is a time to help the child regulate. Children learn to regulate by co-regulating with a trusted adult. Children do not learn how to regulate emotions and their bodies connected to emotions until they're adults. And I know some adults who don't know how to do this. They're learning it, they're wiring their system. So shaming a child or telling a child, like, you're a big boy, why can't you do this? Actually, maybe their neurological system is not as developed as they might appear that it is. There might be an expectation gap there. And our kids with autism frequently have this problem because they're can be so intelligent and have a really underdeveloped neurological system, so they're overreactive emotionally. So helping a child that's in the red zone, first and foremost, we cannot help a child calm until we ourselves are calm. So they've done, there's been a lot of research on how we have mirror neurons. And when we ourselves, our physiological state is calm, then children's, we actually mirror one another. The child will help be calm. Instead of saying, take a deep breath at this point, you yourself would take a deep breath, and that downloads to the child. Their mirror neurons kick in, and they'll go ahead and take a deep breath. Notice next time you're like having a heated discussion with someone, take a deep breath. You'll notice that person slowing down as well. Of course, getting everyone safe, we want to make sure that no one's going to get hurt. If you have a paraprofessional in the classroom, it might be that they move the children over to the corner and read a book while you help this child calm. No one's going to be learning when a child in the classroom is in the red zone. If at this point you approach the child and say, I can't believe you're doing this again, go to timeout, you're actually matching the child in the red zone, and you're going to send the child up. You need to help the child come down. So cues of safety include a soft voice. A louder voice is going to go ahead and continue to move that child farther into the red zone, getting on their level. I don't recommend touching a child in the red zone unless you have a history with a child and you know that a touch is calming, because a gentle touch might be perceived as something unsafe to the child. Making an empathetic statement. I add this to every behavior plan that I write as the first thing because I've seen it make a tremendous difference. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. So when you give empathy to the child, you yourself begin to realize, like, wow. So, wow, this is, you might say to this child, let's say this child was denied something he really wants. Wow, you really wanted to have that toy. And I asked you to put it away. You seem like you feel really mad. I understand that's hard. I wouldn't overtalk, but an empathetic statement. It's not what you say, it's your tone, the speed of your speech. It's important to remember that abilities vary based on regulation. So I've heard so many people, and I made the mistake before I knew about this, telling children, use your words. You know how to use your words. When a child is in the red zone or even the yellow zone, they're not able to access their higher level thinking skills that they've developed at that point. Think about a time when you were in a heated discussion with someone made you really mad or you're upset. Then you went home and you're like, gosh, I should have told them this. Why didn't I think about that? Because when you're upset, you're not able to access your frontal lobe either. So give that child empathy and remember that this child's whole neurological system is still developing. It is a skill to learn how to have body brain body control right now. And the younger they are, the more their body dictates what their brain does. Also, it's really easy to fall into the punishment trap, especially if a child's easily triggered into the red zone. And punishment works in the moment. Telling a child, stop right now, or you're going to lose your iPad time, and it stops the behavior. That's what punishment actually means in the behavioral world. But it's only temporary. It feels good to the person who, administered the punishment because they're like, hey, it worked. I'm going to keep doing this. However, it doesn't teach anything, and it takes more of whatever the punisher was next time to make it effective. That's how we go from like a little bit of a raised voice, and then the child habituates that to a louder voice. That's actually how abuse kind of gets shaped up in some families where, yelling worked, stop the behavior, no longer works. A little slap will stop that behavior, and then the child gets used to it, no longer works. A harder slap, and it gets shaped up. And that's how some really bad adult behaviors shape up. So knowing punishment feels good for a moment, but it doesn't teach anything, and it's just going to take more of it, can help you go, and that's not the right way to go. Teaching is the right way to go, and waiting until the child is calm to teach is the right time. I had to put this slide in here again because empathetic statements are key. They change our state to be more empathetic to where the child is, and they help the child feel heard and helps her tone of voice. Try them out. You'll be surprised. I also like to look at a child who's acting out as kind of like as that being shark behavior. The child might be protecting themselves, their whole neurological system protecting themselves from what they might see as threats in the environment. But underneath it, they're just a little tiny goldfish swimming in the big ocean or swimming in the big pond, trying to survive. And when you kind of shift your thought process from this kid is such, he is just trying to ruin my life. He's trying to trigger me. And sometimes they are trying to trigger us because they like the response. But kind of thinking about this is a little guy who needs some help. He needs some help calming and regulating. Um, on that note, children who also have ADHD really often like to get a reaction from adults in their life because that releases dopamine. And when they have ADHD, they don't have enough dopamine, so they're always seeking it. That's why they engage in a lot of dangerous behaviors, jumping off of things, and they also like uh, triggering adults because to them that releases dopamine. It's exciting to them to upset adults. So if you have a child like that in your classroom, it's best to learn how to like not react when they do try to trigger you so that that's not given reinforcement. It's really important as we talk about this to be thinking about being the thermostat and not the thermometer. A thermometer means that as the classroom energy state, you know what I'm talking about, gets higher and more dysregulated, they all feed off of each other. And you match them. They get loud, you get louder. They get loud, you get louder. That's you being a thermometer, and they don't need a thermometer. They need a thermostat. They need you to be set at 72, calm, able to regulate yourself, aware of yourself, so that you can help set the thermostat for your classroom. Reflect, am I overreacting to certain children? Do certain children trigger me? Do certain things in the environment? Do I spend more time giving more, direction or even fussing at one child in particular? Does that child trigger me? How can I set my thermostat and re-look at what this child needs? Emotional contagion is real. When we are escalated, the children will match us. I am by far not perfect. I remember days in my classroom when I was just hadn't slept well, didn't feel good, easily agitated for various reasons. And it was just, it was contagious. The whole classroom would just feel different than days when I was super calm, regulated, aware of how I affected the children, made a point of, really focusing on positive and things like that. And it makes a difference. So it can work for you both ways. Emotional contagion with you being super calm and regulated versus being easily triggered can help everyone benefit because then they can learn when they're calm and able to focus in the green zone. So we hear a lot about self-care, even to the point that we're like, but it really is extremely important because if you are not taking care of yourself and aware of yourself, then you might end up being in the yellow zone, easily triggered to the red zone or even the blue zone, depressed. So self-monitor, know those triggers. What gets you, what days, what happens, what child, all those little things that can push you over the edge. Know your zones. I invite you to learn the zones of regulation and start recognizing, like, boy, I'm moving into the yellow zone. That really got to me. I'm going to do blank, blank, blank to help myself get back to the green zone. Give yourself empathy. This is hard. I have a hard classroom this year. That's a hard child. I'm going to do the best that I can. Use your self-regulation skills. We'll talk about those. I know it's hard to get outside of a classroom, but if someone does walk by, if you do have a moment to get out, instead of saying, oh, I have to get paperwork done, go ahead and take a walk. Drink waters during transition so that your brain can work the best that it can. Here's some self-regulation ideas that I use for myself, and I've taught the children that I work with. 4-7-8 breathing. This is an evidence-based way of controlling your heart rate. So it's 4 in, hold for 7, out for 8. The longer you breathe out, the more oxygen gets into your blood. It's actually not the in breath, it's the out breath. So when we start feeling anxious, we start doing shallow breathing, which speeds up our heart rate, which gets us into that fight or flight zone. So when you feel yourself escalating, getting your heart rate down, the physiological sigh works so well, you can feel it working. So it's 2 really deep breaths in. So it's deep breath in, one more on top of it, and then a long sigh out. It's what we do when we cry. Think about it. Go. It calms us down. I invite you to go on YouTube and look up physiological sigh. Um, there's some guided sighs that you can do, but I use it, and boy, you can actually feel your brain get a lot more oxygen. Something you can teach your whole classroom, and you can teach your kids to do this, is palm tracing. Just when you start paying attention to something outside of yourself, you're able to unhook from those repetitive thoughts of like, this is hard, I can't do this. So like just taking your hand and inviting your whole class, let's have a little moment of silence and tracing. Each child traces their own lines in their hand. You can also have them take turns tracing the lines in each other's hands, but no talking and just being noticing. Noticing 5 things helps get you out of that fight or flight state. So it might be the whole class. Let's all notice 5 things we hear, 5 things we see, 5 things we can feel. And the younger they are, if they're under 6, they haven't developed self-talk yet, or it's developing, so it's going to come out of their mouth. So you can expect them to be quiet as they're noticing things. As they get older, they're able to keep it to themselves. I have a favorite self-monitoring tool. We've been using this is something that you can get off of Amazon. It's what people use in golf to count their golf strokes. And I use it for myself to count my breathing. It's kind of a reminder to take deep breaths. I might use it to count any new behaviors that I'm working on. You yourself in your classroom can pick some behaviors you want to work on to help increase your self-care so you can be in the green zone. You might pull a bead for every time you take a sip of water, take a water break. You might pull a bead for every time you stop and check what zone you're in. Count how many times you take deep breaths. You might count how many times you give positive praise to the children and your paraprofessional. You might count class-wide regulation breaks. So it's important to embed these regulation breaks throughout your entire day. You can buy them on Amazon, a pack of them. You can also use them for a token economy. Like we use them where for self-monitoring for a child who's like working on getting, staying on task, where they can have this on their book back and pull the beads. And that way they're working towards independent self-monitoring. So I'm going to challenge you to choose and practice 3 ways to self-regulate before the school year starts and practice them daily so that it's a go-to, so that when you're in the heat of the moment in the classroom, you can use these practices. And this will keep you out of fight or flight, will keep you from producing cortisone, which makes us gain weight and helps us, affects our memory, and keeps you in the green zone so that you can be there to help the children who need help learning how to regulate so that they can learn to calm and work through hard things and be able to work and learn. So when you think about teaching self-regulation, we need to do it in a developmental sequence. I've been using this sequence for 8 years now, and I have learners who've been with me since they're 3 and that are 9 now, who are just so good at self-regulation. But you have to teach it. And it's really important not to tell kids to breathe when they're upset. First, you have to really help them just practice breathing when they're not upset. So the first thing is being aware of your internal state. So it might be after doing something with the Promethean board where you're all moving and then feeling your hearts and then say, I wonder how we could calm our hearts down, slow them down, and then practice taking breaths and feeling our heart rate again. So to be able to name your emotions and also to begin to learn how to self-regulate, you've got to be aware of your inner sense. Um, then you practice slowing down your movements and breaths. Model and talk about and practice this concept several times a day for several months. So you might talk a lot about like active to calm, ways to slow your breath down. Practice breathing together when not upset. So you practice like make up fun breaths. It might be like if you're studying dinosaurs, make up the dinosaur breath. How would a dinosaur breathe? And just remember, breath in, long breath out. And have children make up different breaths practice. And then once you are doing it all the time and it's associated with something fun, then you can help the children practice breathing when they're a little upset. So you might say, hey, I noticed that you look upset about what just happened. I wonder if you'd be willing to breathe with me. Maybe we could do the dinosaur breath. And what that does, it's just not a hokey thing to do. It actually gets them unhooked from moving up to the fight or flight and escalating. Once they're willing to do it when they're upset, and still do it while they're fun, while during fun activities. And then you can move, and this takes months of work, to breathing when upset. The mistake is made when we tell children to breathe when they're upset, and they begin to pair being told to breathe with being upset. And just like telling adult to take some deep breaths, they're just like, forget you, because it's associated with negative things. If you do this, you're going to give the children in your classroom a gift for life, because if we can learn how to regulate, we can work through hard things and we're more successful. You might be thinking, well, I don't have time to teach all of this. You really don't have to do more. You embed self-regulation and connection into your classroom routine and expectations. You and your students will reap the positive benefits all year long. So also cues of safety are being noticed, being talked to. Some of you are probably familiar with conscious discipline, standing at the door. They have a greeting ritual where the children walk through and get to choose how to greet. Rituals are calming to the brain and body and get the child's brain ready to learn and help decrease anxiety. Especially, we talked about that group of children that just has a really high level of anxiety and easily triggered. So it might be like before you transition from the rug to work, that you practice some breathing together, have different children come up with different ideas for breathing, connect with one another, see one another, be present, and move on to your next activity. They'll be more likely to sit still and focus. So a lot of you guys have smart boards, which are really cool. However, sometimes they aren't that cool because they actually can overstimulate some of our children. So I want to just give you some ideas about using these more intentionally. Uh, Jumping and fast beats and fast dancing can cause learners to be overexcited. It gets their whole sensory system up. If they're already overexcited, it can put them over the edge. I'm sure you've had the experience where you're doing movement, brain break, and they're like bouncing into each other and like, why can't we just have fun without everyone trying to like kill each other, hurt each other? Um, I say that facetiously. Also, some children who all the children seem to want to be up front by the Promethean board, so they're all crowded together. A lot of children perceive their body sensory system, neurological system perceives that as they need to protect themselves when people are getting up close. So they might push. These children also might have a hard time walking in line. Large screens over alert the brain. There's research where you go no screen time, behaviors typically go down because it over alerts the fight or flight part of the brain. So too much screen time, not so great. So you combine fast moving, crowded, large screens, it can actually not be so great. Whereas slow movements, think about like bouncing a baby, slow beats, cue the body, brain, heart rate to slow down and get the children back in a green zone. You can do brain breaks without a screen, just the music. so that they're not being exposed. If you do something that's alerting, there's a lot of brain breaks available that are also calming. I would always follow the two. So something that can help lessen anxiety is building resilience in children. When children are not resilient, they're more likely to feel anxious and easily triggered and move more into that fight or flight zone. So modeling positive self-talk, you yourself like might be working on something and maybe some technology with the children and you can't get online. You can model, I can do hard things. I've done hard things before. I can do them again. I'm going to take a deep breath to help myself feel better. I'm going to go get a drink of water. I'm going to take a little break and come back. So modeling strategies of how to deal with hard things, model and praise flexible thinking. Really what we're going for, what successful adults have, is they're able to think flexibly. They don't get stuck on, I can't solve this problem. I want it to be this way and I can't move on. And children with autism that's part of their deficits is psychological inflexibility. And that leads to not being able to problem solve or think through problems and getting stuck and then engaging in behaviors. We want to praise effort. You kept trying and you didn't give up, and then you figured it out. I don't know if you're aware of the research where they took two groups of children. One group, they said, you're so smart. The other group said, you're hard workers. They gave them both hard tasks. The group they told, you're so smart, when the task got hard, they quit because it didn't align with what they thought about themselves. The children who they told were hard workers, they gave them a hard task. They kept working at it and working at it because it aligned with who they thought they were, and they actually wanted harder tasks, therefore they were more successful. So stay away from praising the child um, and praise their effort and their ability to try versus praising them as smart. Another saying I like is, you've done hard things before, you can do them again. And also modeling the mindset that mistakes are opportunities to learn and grow. You can make mistakes and intentionally say, wow, I made a mistake. That's okay. Next time I'm going to blank. That was an opportunity to grow. Children with autism have a harder time with their interoceptive sense. A lot of this is something that a lot of people aren't aware of. So we have our five senses, and then we have our vestibular sense, which is your balance, your proprioceptive sense, which is your ability to know where your body is in space. Children who don't have a good proprioceptive sense tend to knock into other people, crash their bodies because they're trying to figure out where their body is in space, which is pretty common with our kids with autism. So it's not really a behavior. They just don't know where their body is in space. And the interoceptive sense is your ability to be able to read your own body, whether it's hungry, whether you need water. So if you can't figure out if you're hungry or need water because you can't read your interoceptive sense, you're more likely to get into fight or flight, get anxious, act out. Also, it's harder to get potty trained when you don't have a strong interoceptive sense because you can't read your own body. So this is a little board we made for a learner who was having a hard time reading his inner sense and would get really dysregulated, highly anxious, fight or flight behaviors all the time. And we helped him figure out what helped his body feel better. And then we would start by prompting, like, I wonder what would help your body feel better. And he began to like ask. And so instead of crashing his body into people, he could ask for a hug, shoulder squeezes, that's that proprioceptive sense, water, or even if he was feeling his sensory system was extra sensitive that day, auditorily, he could ask to work in a quiet place. And so we went from prompting him to choose one for it to having this on his desk. He could choose it by himself. And we also used a token economy and gave reinforcement to use those beads for when he started using it himself. And then we eventually he used it on his own. Now it's faded out because he can just say, hey, my body needs this. So he's aware, so he's able to take care of himself instead of escalating. It's a gift to give a child. It's important to invest in the relationship bank with children. Think about it. When you're in a fight, fuss with your significant other, and they ask you to do something and you're not happy with something they did, you're much more likely to go, no, I'm not going to do that for you. When you are in relationship and you've been getting along well and someone asks you to do something, you're much more likely to go, sure, I'm going to do that for you. Of course. You have that relationship bank with every child in your classroom. And if you pay into the bank, it's much more likely that your learners are going to feel calm. It's going to give them safety cues, and they're much more willing to try hard things and to cooperate. So know your children. It's a great idea to send like a preference assessment, like send home a assessment at the beginning of the school year, asking parents, really tell me about your child. What music do they like? What's their favorite snack? What's their favorite characters, favorite movies? Because when you know that about them, they're going to feel seen and heard, and that's investing in their relationship bank. You can also pair up children with similar interest. Maybe they both love Minions. Noticing your learners, like, wow, notice you got a haircut. You look so grown up. Or some learners might like to not be noticed. They're more shy. Also noticing, like, hey, I noticed John got out his pencil and started working. Way to go, Johnny. Feeling seen is important. Just enjoying your children in your classroom. Sometimes being silly can defuse a child who's moving to the red zone um, quicker than anything else. Be authentic. This means that you don't have to hide your feelings. If you are feeling frustrated, you can model talking about your emotions. Boy, I'm feeling really frustrated. I've asked everyone to be quiet. I've modeled being quiet, and you guys are still being super loud. I'm having a hard time thinking. I am feeling frustrated right now. I'm going to go take a deep breath and get some water. So, not pretending everything's great because kids can see it on her face. Build connection into your routine. Like I said, coming in, doing a greeting. It might be like when you pull them in for a small group, have a little bit of small talk for a few moments. You might feel like, hey, that's wasting time, but a little bit can make them much more willing, calmer, and ready to learn. So, a formula for class-wide success, if I had to really boil some things down from what I've learned over the past 30 years in this field, this would be them. When you're talking to children, give them very specific directions and teach your expectations. So instead of like, everybody sit nice, that does not tell them what it looks like. Paint a picture. Sit with your legs crossed and your hands in your lap with your eyes on me. Your job is to learn right now. My job is to teach. And teach expectations. At the beginning of the school year, and I know you do this, is just taking the time to teach, during small group transition. Our voice level needs to be a level 2. Let's practice what a level 2 sounds like. Is this a level 2? Is this a level 2? Children's brains love contrast. So like acting out things. Is this a level 2? And them going, no, and then show me a level 2. Um, Practice and role play classroom expectations. I role playing it over and over again. Role playing what would happen if someone left a chair out. Well, you could fall over it. What would happen? What would be the helpful thing to do? Pushing your chairs in. But children have to do things hundreds of times in context, especially the younger they are, to remember it. I also highly recommend ignoring minor junk behavior. Junk behavior are behaviors that don't result in something unsafe happening. So, for example, if you're teaching large group and there's one child who keeps on maybe making a sound, and our brains are wired to pay attention to what we don't want. That's how we protect ourselves. So it's kind of a mind shift. Instead of going, Johnny, please be quiet. And the child does it again, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet. Then all the other children start making the noise. Just think in your head, that's junk behavior. I'm going to ignore it. And then the minute he does something appropriate, attend to that. Also attending to the other children, giving specific praise, like, thank you so much, Kathy, for sitting on your bottom and looking at me. I know you're paying attention, and that makes my heart happy. Thank you. And I know you're ready to learn. Telling the child exactly what they did right is like coaching, so they know what the behavior looks like, so they can repeat it. Saying, good job, does not give a child a mental picture of what they did well. Avoid power struggles. It's easy to get in power struggles. It's like a child holding out a rope, and if you take the other end, you're going to get in a power struggle. So, like I said earlier, those children, especially those with ADHD, really love power struggles because that gives them a dopamine release and they want to get you upset. So, like dropping the rope, ignoring it, walking away. Giving choices, as children developmentally need to learn to assert themselves, as simple as, do you want to work on the floor or do you want to work at your desk? Do you want to use the red marker or the pencil? Do you want to sit by so and so or so and so? Do you want to do math first or do you want to do this first? Choices can take a child who has a lot of anxiety and wants to control everything and give them the feeling of being in control and reduce anxiety. A really just if you just remember this, you get more of what you pay attention to. So if you're over teaching in small group and there's some other children working on their computer and one of them is off task, um, you know, tapping or drawing when they shouldn't be, if you start paying attention to that, then all the other children are like, oh, I want some attention too, and more likely to be off task. Versus, thank you so much, Christine, for look at you working so hard. I see you getting that work done. You're going to have so much fun going to centers later. I noticed so and so is so focused. Just you can be a small group and just give some specific praise. And the minute that child that was off task gets back on task, I notice Johnny is getting to work. You're really growing up. I bet you're gonna have a little time to go to center time too. Whatever you pay attention to in your life across the board, you're gonna get more of because that's what gets reinforced. You might say, this is all nice, but how do I set boundaries with children? I like to use ACT. Acknowledge A is acknowledge the child's feelings, wishes, and wants. C is communicate the limit in terms of safety. For example, if a child grabbed another child's toy, you might say, boy, you really wanted that toy. You may not grab. Grabbing is not safe. Next time, you can say, can I please have a toy? You could go get another toy. Um, and you can even say which one works for you. And take that moment to teach. If you have a moment, do a role play. Let's pretend I have a toy. What are you going to do next time? So it's better to set boundaries earlier if you notice something's about to happen than afterwards. Applying logical consequences. So of course children need consequences to learn. So we're thinking about body, body brain behaviors, brain body behaviors. Let's say it's a body brain behavior and the child's pushing the limits and testing you. If the child's running, you might say, running's not safe. Go back and try it again safely. And then give specific praise. Having a child redo a behavior lays down a neural network for it. If a child's pushing in line, you can say, hey, it's not safe to push. I'm not going to let you push. Go to the end of the line so that you don't have someone behind you and in front. That might keep you from not pushing. If a child's throwing blocks, you might say, hey, throwing blocks is not safe. And this is you, of course, reminding them ahead of time if they're younger. You can build with the blocks, you can line the blocks up, but you can't throw the blocks. You can say, hey, if you choose to throw the blocks again, you're done for that center for the day. You can try again tomorrow. And then just walk away. And you might acknowledge, I know that's hard. It's part of learning. A lot of children with autism have anxiety around academics. Know the child's accommodations. Do they really have to finish all the work? I've had teachers who, especially that might have an inclusion and might have a child in their classroom, um, regular ed teachers who are like, but I want them to finish all of the work because I said so. And we check with them and we're like, hey, he has an accommodation. He does not have to finish all the work, but they just get stuck on, some teachers get stuck on, I told him to do it, he has to do it. know their accommodations. Does the child really have to do all the work? Or can you assign three math problems, three reading problems? Maybe give them a sheet of math and say, pick three problems, give them a choice. Chunk assignments. That means you focus on one part of assignment at a time instead of giving them this whole packet. It might be like, let's just start on this first piece. Even getting a piece of paper and covering up the rest so there's not a lot of visual information to overwhelm the child, which can make them start, feeling stress. Giving choices, like we talked about, where to start, what questions to start with, completing three or five problems, what to write with, when to work, how to show they know the material. Give time for the child to find a good place to stop. So it might be like, if they're working on something, you might say, hey, we're going to be going in about 5 minutes. You can keep working, but try to find a good place to stop. That way they're not like, I have to stop right now. I want to finish this sentence or I want to finish this. Like say, hey, let me know when you get to a good place to stop. We'll be leaving in 5 minutes. So just be ready for that. But if you can stop before that, that's okay. A lot of children need executive functioning assistance. If you don't know much about executive functioning, I really like the book Smart But Scattered. It gives you a lot of information. So you think about executive functioning, other skills an executive needs to be successful, such as working memory, initiating task, organizing, finishing a task. Some children with autism have really poor executive functioning skills and they need help. So we took a picture of this child's desk with it organized and taped it to the desk so the child could reference what a neat working environment looks like. And we could ask them to match their desk to the picture, which helped reduce clutter, which helped them find what they needed faster and reduced anxiety and helped them stay on task more. We also took a picture of their folder so they could refer back to that. So once again, all of this goes back to some children perceive things that you wouldn't perceive as a demand and puts them into fight or flight. It might just be too many directions in a day, might put their body budget low. And you just talking to them might really put them in a fight or flight. It just depends on their body budget and their own personal how they're wired. Something that I absolutely love is declarative language, and this can cut down on demands for children, and it can also help them learn to reference the environment to pick up on cues, contextual cues, which, as we discussed, is a definite deficit that really gets in children with autism's way. So it might be like, hey, I noticed that your friend is looking at your toy and just waiting to see if the child will reference the friend. If the child doesn't, I wonder if your friend likes Minions too. So the child might think, oh, and ask the other child, do you like Minions? Versus, why don't you ask him if he likes Minions? So you're giving them information, or like, let's say everyone in the classroom is working and one learner is staring off. You might say, hey, Tom, I noticed that all of your friends have their pencil out and they're working right now. And the way you know they heard you is they look around and then they typically will like pick up onto the contextual cue and go ahead and do it. So just using words like I hope, I remember, I wonder, I notice. So you're giving them information so they can make some decisions on their own, which leads to independence. All of this can result in a child having more, just less anxiety, being more engaged, being more able to learn, and results in an overall happier classroom and a happier teacher. Once again, my name is Melissa Burkhardt. I can be contacted at melissa@earlystartautism.com. And we provide services in the Palm Beach Gardens, Jupiter area, as well as we'll be moving into Martin County sooner than later. Um, Here are our references. And that is it.